that I have had from Pakistan over here has gone to disprove that fact. I actually get so many requests for interviews from within the Western media over here in Pakistan that it just goes to show that absolutely the world is still paying attention, and now we are focused on how we're using this space that we had to take this bilateral relationship forward. I think everybody knows our past. We know what great things we've managed to achieve together when Pakistan and the United States have worked together, and we know where we have faltered when we have been unable to cooperate or create that consensus. What I'm happy to report is over the last seven to 8 months since I've been the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, we've had a consistent back and forth of engagement with the United States at various levels. And our sort of report card for the last 6 months of FP with US-PAC relations is that if in the last decade 90% of our conversations were focused around counterterrorism, the war on terror, now we're engaging far more diversely on a whole host of issues, as was mentioned in the introduction. We've had exchanges on climate, we've had exchanges on tech, we've had exchanges on healthcare cooperation with our Minister of Health visiting, even potential cooperation in agriculture. We certainly do still talk about terrorism in our bilateral engagements, but we have a far more comprehensive sort of itinerary in which we are now engaging. We've seen visits before the floods of high-level US officials to Pakistan, including obviously Derek Chollet and others, but Dilawar Saeed from the State Department, who went on an extensive sort of trip in our region, but in Pakistan visited Islamabad, visited Lahore, visited Karachi, and engaged with the business community, engaged with the chambers of commerce to find ways for our business communities to find economic opportunities for us to exploit. The United States is still Pakistan's biggest customer, and there's far more economic potential for us to unlock. While we pursue these aspirations, unfortunately, the people of Pakistan are facing crises after crises, some of which are of our own making, and we have to be able to be cognizant of that and address those issues, but the majority of which are not of our own making. They're not of our own making, but they have extreme consequences for the people of Pakistan. And the way in which we engage with each of these issues, the solutions that we find for them and our ability to implement those solutions will decide the direction of Pakistan's policy in the coming decade, 2 decades. It'll decide the direction of Pakistan's economic trajectory the next decade, 2 decades, and it'll decide the direction of Pakistan's foreign policy in the times to come. What are the challenges that we are facing? Some of the challenges are challenges that are being faced all across the globe. We all are suffering from the consequences of the once-in-a-100-year COVID pandemic, which isn't over as of yet. The shadows of this pandemic are still affecting economies across the world. The fall of Kabul and the government in Afghanistan, and the consequences that will have for our economy, for peace and stability in our region. Not an event of our making, but something that's affecting not only Pakistan, but everybody around us. The Ukraine war and the restrictions associated with that, the economic consequences of which you are experiencing here in the United States, Europe is facing in Europe, and the average Pakistani is facing also in the form of food insecurity, high inflation, high gas pumps, high prices at the pump. And to top it all off, as if that wasn't enough, we experienced this year what can be only described as a climate catastrophe of biblical proportions. We, for the South Asians in the audience, are used to monsoons, we're used to floods, we experience them time and time again. But this was something extraordinary. Our monsoons came early, and when they came, they just would not stop. I believe that in the Bible it says that at the time of Noah's Ark, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Well, will you believe it that Pakistan's monster monsoons lasted longer than 40 days and 40 nights? We started an early monsoon in June that went on until September, the end of September. And when that downpour, when that flooding from the sky stopped, 1/3 of the landmass of my country, imagine the scale of that in comparative. I don't know, you guys at the Atlantic Council will probably know more as far as, imagine the scale of that compared to any American state. Imagine proportionately 1/3 of America being underwater, your landmass underwater, after a weather event. 1 in 7 people devastated. That's 33 million people, costing $30 billion is our damage needs assessment, $32 billion, which is about 10% of our GDP, washed away in a single climate catastrophe. That is if I'm sort of comparing all the challenges I just listed out before you, the biggest challenge for the people of Pakistan right now, if we get this right, if we get the economics right, the foreign policy right, the climate resilient angle right, then we can come up with a 5-10-year plan, and that we can start getting the funding together for, that will not only allow us to build back better, invest in the local economy while building climate resilient infrastructure, so preparing for the next climate disaster, but also benefiting those who've been affected. If we get it right, we can do it in a way that the people who are affected, once we address their needs, and I granted it'll take time, but once we address their needs and we rebuild, we can do so in a manner so that they're better off than they were at the start of the floods. If we get this wrong, this is a crisis situation waiting to implode in all our faces, which is why, ever since this disaster struck, we've been traveling the length and breadth of the world to try and raise awareness. The COP27 was good to this effect, and all our engagements are about creating opportunities for us to rebuild our lives in a better manner as a result of this catastrophe. I'm not under any delusions. I'm completely cognizant of the fact that COVID has affected everyone, that Ukraine has not only affected everyone, but crowded out everyone's humanitarian budgets, crowded out everybody else's parliament's spending capacity across Europe, here in the United States. But for me, it's important to engage internationally. I'm very grateful for the UN Secretary General for co-hosting our Climate Resilient Conference that will be kicking off on the 9th of January. But we don't see that as an end in itself. It's not like we're going to stand alongside the UN Secretary General on the 9th of January and say, here all the issues are sorted, we've managed to finish, complete our financing, the story is over. That'll be a start of a process. A start of a process for Pakistan to present to the world how we can turn this catastrophe into an opportunity. How we can ensure that if Pakistan gets this right now, we know the next country, because this won't stop at us, the next country to find 1/3 of its landmass underwater, 1 in 7 of its population affected, we'll know that there's a plan in place in a way to deal with this crisis. If we get this right and have multiple sort of international partners in dealing with this catastrophe, then we'll be working together as an international community to deal with the climate challenge of our time. If we see this as a process, then we start off together on January 9th in Geneva with the UN Secretary General. But that's the beginning of our Climate Resilient Pakistan roadshow, not the end of our Climate Resilient Pakistan roadshow. And we'd have to take that initiative from capital to capital, not only to the government, G2G, with G2G in mind, but also international financial institutions, as well as the private sector. I'm so pleased to hear that you had the head of Pakistani Engro at the Atlantic Councils. I hope he had the opportunity to share with you how, through public-private partnership, we've managed to achieve great things in the province of Sindh with that and other companies. And we've shown, whether it's infrastructure projects, whether it's in energy infrastructure, whether it's in communication infrastructure, that we've managed, in partnership with the private sector, to achieve big things. The task in front of us seems insurmountable, but I am convinced, with the hard work and consistent engagement, that we will be able to overcome this crisis. It's a climate crisis. It's a health crisis. The World Health Organization has warned about the knock-on effects. We're now seeing how waterborne diseases, our malaria season, for example, in Pakistan has extended far longer than we expected. And as we go into the winter, we're expecting more issues related to health. It's an educational crisis. I can give you stats off the top of my head from my home province of Sindh, but I imagine that other provinces also have some worrying figures. The educational infrastructure, just in the one province of Sindh, 47% of our educational infrastructure has been either partially damaged or completely damaged as a result of the flooding. 47% of the educational infrastructure in one province. Can you imagine 47% of the educational infrastructure in any one state in America being devastated? 52% of my school-going children in Sindh used to go to those 47% of the educational infrastructure, which means they don't have a school to go to since the onset of this rain. Similarly, the health infrastructure must have been affected in my province and other provinces. And the health catastrophe that I was talking about. Agriculture. The agriculture sector is the backbone of our economy in Pakistan. Our farmers had 5 million acres of standing crops destroyed during the floods that affected the rice crop, that affected the cotton crop. And because there are many areas that are still flooded today in Sindh and in Balochistan, those areas where the water hasn't receded, it's also affected their wheat crop. And that is, from an economics perspective, from the agricultural perspective, from the food security perspective, an enormous challenge. But we're ready to seize this challenge, to seize this moment, and ensure that we create an opportunity out of this crisis. We leave those who've been devastated the most by this tragedy in a better position once we're ended with this process than when they started. I look forward to engaging with you and taking some questions. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Mr. Thank you for those.
Can I get a pen and a pad? Sure.
Thank you for those opening remarks. And just for the audience, before I kick it off, we can take your questions in. There's an iPad circulating around. So if you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand and someone from our team will reach out to you to get the question in the system. Clearly, the climate catastrophe is the #1 issue facing Pakistan, and building back better, as you said, is a priority. I want to begin with, beyond that, from a foreign policy perspective, looking ahead at the next 6 to 8 months, which is basically towards the end of your term as foreign minister and the new elections in Pakistan, what are other key priorities that you have in terms of foreign policy that you would like to either accomplish or make significant progress towards moving forward?
Okay, so pre-flood, sort of my aim was very simple. We've got a limited amount of time, and we wanted to even if we just make baby steps, take those important steps of increased engagement with all our partners, with our historic partners, with old friends, with new friends. What I found when I became Foreign Minister of Pakistan was a situation far worse than I'd expected. Name a traditional relationship that Pakistan had, and it had been damaged. Our credibility had been damaged. Our position had been damaged. Our reputation had been damaged. Our conduct had been such. Whatever the reasons are, I'm not going to get into a partisan debate as to where, when, and why. But the suffice to say that that's the case. And we can't promise to reinvent the wheel overnight. But what I could promise, and what I saw being delivered, was an absolute willingness and an improvement through simple engagement at our level, at the PM's level, within our region, within the Middle East, within Europe, but most significantly and most notably here in the United States. And as a result of those baby steps, all I wanted to achieve was a diversification in what we talked about. As I mentioned in my opening statement, that most of our focus was single-dominated topic of the war on terror, but that's not the only thing that any bilateral relations could be contingent upon. So I was very happy to note that we were expanding in all those fields. Specifically, everybody is looking to diversify economic opportunities at this time for one reason or another, whether it was, Brexit, whether it was COVID, whether it is Ukraine, whether it is geopolitical challenges. Everyone wants to diversify their economic engagement, given that Pakistan does not engage fully or reach its full economic potential with many of its partners or many people that we engage with. That is an area that I have been consistently engaging with and trying to address, to reflect Pakistan's seriousness on the ground in the realm of CT, and ensure that we achieve sort of international targets in line with that. For example, when I came in, we'd basically finished the FATF action plan, but the state of our bilateral relations, the state of our relations with all those countries that had to decide that we need to be moving from the grey list and the white list. You can achieve each and every single one of those points, but if you're fingering those exact countries in the eye, then they're not going to be interested in doing it. So I'm very, very pleased that one of the early things that we managed to deliver on was not only the completion of those two Financial Action Task Force, but the early completion and removal by consensus from the grey list onto the white list, which have had positive effects not only for our economy, but a signal to the world of where Pakistan is on dealing with money laundering and counter-terror finance. As soon as the floods hit, it's not only a climate challenge, which I think we've performed and delivered within the context of the G77 chairmanship at the platform with loss and damage, but now I believe that this is the path to our economic recovery. If we look, these areas of Pakistan that are devastated, they're the most deprived areas of the country. It's Balochistan, it's Sindh, it's South Punjab, it's South Pakhtunkhwa, it's Gilgit-Baltistan. If I was looking at a way to stimulate my economy myself right now, I would be coming up with ways to conduct infrastructure projects in those areas to stimulate the local economy, stimulate local jobs, and achieve some end. No way was I going to get any interest or financing for that. It would be very difficult to achieve. Now, I have a reason for myself to invest, a reason to convince the world to invest, and turn this crisis into an opportunity. Obviously, that requires collective action. It requires not only some FP delivery, but some finance delivery. So it's still a challenge. But I'm under no delusions that we'll be able to achieve all of this in 1 year's time. I'm very proud of what we've managed to achieve. All I want to do is set us on the right direction. And I believe if we get things off in the right direction, we get even some of the funding going as we start off, some international financial institutions and others to back us. That will create the appetite going forward to continue to come up with this, with the finances for this infrastructure spend. We implement this properly at home, back home, and it gives us a cushion for these difficult economic times.
Well, it's great to hear you so focused on the economic diversification and investment idea. Of course, some of this issue is related to security on the ground. And just over the last couple of days, we've seen a siege, so to speak, of the counter-terror department office in Bannu. And today, 2 security forces dead, martyred. And the return of violence on the Pak-Afghan border. Essentially what former Ambassador Malia Lodi says, Pakistan's Afghan policy has become untenable. And one, I would like to hear from you whether you agree with her assessment, whether it has indeed become untenable. And secondly, given the fact that there are terror safe havens across the border in Afghanistan, is your government prepared to deploy increased military assets on the border or across the border to take out terror infrastructure? Because it is causing, again, concern both on the border side, on the CT, but also in business confidence in terms of what's coming down the pipe for Pakistan.
Okay, so on the terror front, absolutely, security is related to, and security and stability is related to the opportunities that we have vis-a-vis our economy. I would say that the improvement overall in our security situation from 2007 up until now, even despite these latest attacks on our border and elsewhere, is still a far more secure and stable situation than it was back then. There is more of a confidence today for people to do business in Pakistan than there was then. But those things can be put at risk if this goes unchecked. And obviously that would undermine any hope of whether it is CPAC or any other form of economic activity. Nobody wants to put lives at risk in order to conduct business. It's why I've been incredibly sort of within our own government, and particularly hawkish on the issue of the TTP or the issue of terrorism in general. I believe that the recent events in the region that you're referring to are alarming. Not only the border incident, but the recent the Bannu incident, at which our security commanders have very bravely managed to overcome that specific threat. But absolutely, we have to impress on our neighbors, on Afghanistan, that they have to work to demonstrate that they have the will and the capacity to take on the TTP or other groups functioning from there. What our Afghan policy has been in the past, I think everybody's Afghan policy, whether it's our Afghan policy or this country's Afghan policy, to put it diplomatically, there's room for improvement. But look, we can't change what happened in the past. What we can do is we can be serious about what we're going to do going forward. Are we going to learn from our mistakes? The mistakes we made, the mistakes that were made here, or are we going to repeat them again? That choice is ours, and that answer to that question will define the safety and stability of Afghanistan, the safety and stability of Pakistan, and the safety and stability in our region.
As a follow-up on that, again, we know that the Taliban themselves are struggling with the infrastructure present on their territory, whether it's ISKP or the TTP, which the TTP takes bet on the Taliban, as we all know. How far is Pakistan willing to go to coerce the Taliban to take action against groups that conduct strikes on Pakistani soil?
Look, as far as the TTA are concerned, Taliban Afghanistan are concerned, I think it's important for us to get to a position where we can work with them to deal with this issue, and I tell you why. Because I can conduct as many operations as I want on our side of the border. If they're going to jump over the other side, and there's not going to be this hammer and anvil effect. If anybody was around for 2007 to 2013 CT policy, they know how important hammer and anvil was during that time. Unless we have that sort of pincer effect on both sides of the border, no CT policy will be effective. So number one option or priority has to be to getting the authorities, the de facto authorities, the interim government, to demonstrate their will or capacity to deal with this issue. So I still think there's space to explore on that front and that we should do. But as far as the TTP is concerned, it's absolutely our red line. It is something that we will not tolerate. And without going further diplomatically on the record, I would say that absolutely we would be willing to consider each and every single option to ensure the safety and security of our people.
On the climate side, of course, there's the 9 January Donors Conference coming up, and you've had immense support at the UN level on this. But broadly speaking, how satisfied have you been over the last couple of months with the international community's response to the climate tragedy in Pakistan, given that, when we compare the last catastrophe in 2010, a lot more support, a lot more funding flowed in compared to this time around. So would love your thoughts on how you see the pace and scale at which the international community has mobilized so far.
As I said in my speech, I'm realistic. It's not 2010, and it's not 2010 for so many reasons. Let's start with something that's not unique with us. This is once in a lifetime, absolutely ginormous climate catastrophe. But unlike back in 2010, a decade ago, 2 decades ago, where there was one climate catastrophe that you had to address at any one given time. So there's a big Indonesian tsunami, and that's the one agenda that we're all pushing for a significant period of time. What have we seen in the year 2022 as far as extreme climate events across the globe? Once in you want to say 100 years, but I just want to say once and ever, this is not something that we've experienced as far as Pakistan is concerned. But we didn't experience it alone. While we were flooded, China was experiencing the longest drought that they had ever seen. Before we were flooded, we were experiencing an extensive heat wave and drought. You had forest fires raging in California. You had floods and forest fires and landslides, I believe, in Europe. In the UK, fires. In Nigeria, you had flooding. Just the climate space, just the space for your once in 100-year climate disaster, that's quite stretched on the multilateral, on the bilateral, on the humanitarian aid level. Unlike 2010, when Afghanistan was the destination of much of the attention vis-a-vis aid, military aid, developmental support, infrastructural support, now Ukraine is the attention for military aid, humanitarian aid, budgetary support. So I'm absolutely, completely sort of clear-headed, cognizant. I'm not going into January 9th with the expectation that on January 10th I've met my $16 billion, 5% of my GDP financing requirement. What I am confident about is that we will kick off this initiative with the support of multilateral partners. The U.S. Secretary General has been fantastic. Our bilateral partners also, and international financial institutions like the World Bank, ADB, other things, that will provide us a good starting point. It'll provide us the vehicles. So for example, I'll come up with, say, some funding for rebuilding houses, some funding for addressing my agriculture, some funding for addressing my irrigation needs. And those vehicles that we come up with, that'll be backed by a bank, backed by another country, or whatever the scenario works out to be, will then have the legitimacy or the capacity for us going forward to continue to add in funding to, and have a 5-10-year plan to address this crisis. So, I mean, if we are expecting, or if anybody was expecting that we turn up on January 9th and January 10th, this issue is over, absolutely not how we see it. We see January 9th as us kicking off our rehabilitation and reconstruction effort. We're not even calling it a donors conference. We're calling it Climate Resilient Pakistan conference. So we're very cognizant of the target. We're committed to getting the funding together. We're just not under any delusions as to the realistic climate. Within this climate, it's about coming up with the necessary funding.
I want to move to the economic conversation for just a moment. Of course, Engro's CEO was here a few weeks ago making the investment and business case for Pakistan. You're the diplomat-in-chief for Pakistan. And it's a hard job, at least from my vantage point, even selling Pakistan's economic story. And I'm curious, given the ongoing political, economic instability in Pakistan, the issue many American businesses, for example, are facing with repatriating their profits at this point in time, letters of credit not opening, et cetera, et cetera. I know you're not the finance minister, so that's not the question for you. But what is your pitch, the business pitch for Pakistan as the diplomat-in-chief for the country?
Okay. One, obviously, crises are there. I mean, even in times of civil war, people who are keen enough find opportunity for economic investment or opportunity. The pitch for Pakistan is that, harping back to that diversification point, that if you're the United States, well, as I say, the UK, if you're in Europe, if you're the ASEAN region, if you're any of these other countries, you've explored the economic potential, bilateral economic potential, quite extensively between traditional bilateral cooperation, traditional economic diplomacy. I believe that there's a lot of untapped economic potential for Pakistan. So sort of the lowest hanging fruit, when you don't have much to work with, that means you have a lot more space to grow in. So my argument to everyone has been that, sure, we're facing difficult times. We've got these great, I'm sure that the Engro CEO, the tech CEOs that you engage with will give you those, the experience or the opportunities that they've been finding even now. But my pitch is that, sure, it's difficult now, at a time when Pakistan is really only trading with one of its neighbors. And that, too, we haven't expanded sort of the complete economic potential between Pakistan and China, let alone Pakistan and Iran, Pakistan and Afghanistan, and through Afghanistan to the Central Asian republics. But the conversations that I'm having, whether it's with the Central Asian republics, and we managed for sort of very high-level participation at the SCO and others, my first ever, sort of after 10 years, any foreign minister of Pakistan has visited Indonesia or Singapore with sort of the ASEAN perspective in mind. So much economic potential. Can you believe that the largest Muslim country in the world by population, Indonesia, does not have a direct flight to Pakistan?
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you here. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's been my pet peeve that Pakistani stakeholders often talk about land access, but forget that the big markets are through the seas.
That's the main
and they
selling
forget
point.
That point.
That's the main selling point that we have, is that we can become a logistical and trade hub. So CPEC is only seen through a China lens, and it's not just that, that's a lens. That's not the only lens. It's the geographical location. Peace, one day, not today, आएगा तो सही ना पाकिस्तान, Afghanistan, Iran में. आज नहीं, obviously not given my recent comments, but one day, भारत के साथ भी होगा ना. So that day, would you rather get in now and benefit excessively that day, or try and get in late? My conversations, whether it's with the Central Asian republics, who think their fastest, easiest, direct access to their warm waters is not through the long route to one of our neighbors, but directly to Gwadar port, and for us through them up and beyond. I don't have a window into ASEAN or a gateway into ASEAN, but Singapore can provide me that. Other countries in the ASEAN region can provide me that. And I can be an entry point, a logistical point for ASEAN. Who wants to go up to the Central Asian republics, who want to trade through Pakistan, not only up and outwards, but eventually at some point through either side as well. In order to get there, I need to get my house in order. And that takes us to some of the economic decisions that if we take in a manner that enhances our credibility, it empowers me, it empowers other people. But, there's a process there, there's politics there, whatever. But we have to take the important decisions domestically. We have to get our own decisions right. We have to get this vehicle in right. And I believe the story for Pakistan 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, is one of opportunity. And my pitch to everyone is get in now, while you can, while everyone doesn't see that opportunity, so you can maximize your benefit later. And what I'll share with you today is usually I start off my conversations with people and they're over it. Sick and tired, sort out your own issues, and then maybe we'll think about it. When I'm done, they're willing to give us a shot to come and explore bilateral economic opportunities, to send their business teams, to send their commerce teams, to find win-win solutions. So we're in the very early stages. If I can manage to watch this sort of develop one or two stages forward, there's so much opportunity for us to unlock, given the chance. I completely accept it's one crisis after another crisis after another crisis, and it makes it very difficult for us to take advantage of these opportunities, but they are there.
As a follow-up on that, there's a question from the audience on, your exchange of words with the Indian counterpart. We don't need to get into that, but how much of the domestic economic weakness, for example, is a handicap for you and for broader diplomatic engagement Pakistan has with the rest of the world, given the crises at home? Do you see that recurring in your conversations and engagement abroad, that because there's just so much going wrong in Pakistan that folks on the diplomatic side are not willing to listen or engage, or you find yourself not having enough leverage, so to speak?
I would say I don't find myself having enough leverage. Of course, it's easier. Of course, it's far more appetizing, the less chaos we have. But there is an argument that, look, short-term, what looks like political instability, like if the promise of this transition from for our institutions from a controversial role to a constitutional role does pan out, if this institutional development, improvement, achievement for democracy, that rather than a coup, rather than a military order, rather than any other way, a prime minister will be removed through a vote of no confidence, then surely institutional strengthening of democracy is in the long to medium term, in the political interest. It would mean a more stable future. In the short term, obviously those who are no longer prime minister are throwing an 8-month tantrum, but they too will get over it. And the more that all of us have faith in the system, or at least try and make the system work, that's what allows for the stability to come into play. But there are definitely questions about Pakistan's political stability, economic stability, but that doesn't mean we're not trying to address it. Questions, yes. Does it mean it's shutting the door? No.
On the domestic side, again, it's linked to economic issues, particularly technology companies. Pakistan has a law called the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, 2016. Again, unconstitutional role of institutions has had an impact on free expression in the country. What is your government doing to expand that space? Because over the last few years, you've seen a consistent shrinking. And one quick point on that, technology companies here tell us that with laws like PECA 2016, it's very difficult for them to justify opening offices in Pakistan because of what.
So right. I've been so while engaging with countries as foreign minister, given that many of these platforms have more users than many countries have populations, I've engaged with almost all of the tech companies as well, whether it's Google, whether it's Meta, you name it. And they all see the potential. Google's opened up their office. Meta's investing in a big way. I mean, in things like our fiber optic cable infrastructure, they're investing in. They accept payments, because you can sell stuff on the Facebook platforms or whatever, not only in dollars but also in rupees. They have now started this STARS monetization program. Going forward, we might see full-on monetization like they do with YouTube and stuff, with viewers and ads. And I think that's an amazing opportunity that maybe give some productive use to a younger generation that spend all their time on these devices. I really think that we really need to unlock this thing. And the biggest complaint I get, Data Protection Act, another sort of, there's two acts. One is a rule, one is an act. I get them mixed up. Anyway, two of them they have complaints about, and some financial concerns. And if we address these two things, again, another area where there's an immense opportunity to unlock, I would absolutely like for us to reform both those legislations. All of us are on the record in opposition that this is not the direction we want to go with. I know it's incredibly hard. Once you pass something, once you get something done, once something is sort of achieved, it's very hard to reverse. But I think we need to reform the laws and understand. Did you know that this is something I found out when I was at Meta? What country makes the most requests to remove content from Facebook?
Pakistan.
Yeah.
It's the same for TikTok.
I mean, it's ridiculous. So I think that's just because these laws were put together by people who don't understand these platforms, and the people that pass these laws or these regulations don't understand the consequences of their decisions. An area for improvement, but also an area where there's so much potential. I'm hoping to be able to get the consensus around the reforms passed, but I can't promise anything.
I hope you do, because I think from even my perspective, if we get those legislations right, the opportunity is huge. The market is big enough, young enough, tech-savvy enough to take advantage of what's on offer. And guess what? They won't need subsidies like some of the older industries in Pakistan. You just have to get the regulations right for them.
No, they won't need subsidies.
And everything will take off.
Regulations, also the economic side, they need to be able to take out, especially if they're allowing you to trade in rupees, then let them take out their rupees.
Correct.
And I think we'll be
correct. Last question for you. I know early on in your PBS interview, you talked about Pakistan's not buying Russian oil. The petroleum minister said they are. What is the status with Russian oil purchases?
No, the reality is that after the price cap, an opportunity has developed. My point was we're not receiving any Russian oil right now. It is not something I see materializing in the immediate future, because we're a new customer for Russia. You have to go through insurance and a whole process. But we do have an energy emergency problem. We do have people who can't afford to buy the energy that we need. So we have to go everywhere, whether it's there, here, anywhere we can find the resources we need. I even mentioned in my speech, if I didn't, allow me now, the traditional areas where we go to. Europeans and everybody else are now going there to get their LNG, to get their energy. So it's very important for us to diversify. But I think what Imran did with the Russian oil shosha was that, where I use that word, trakki batti, it was not a substantial conversation. And we're not at the point where, tomorrow the oil will start flowing. So I was just trying to set expectations that, let's not repeat the mistakes of the guy before us. And absolutely, this price cap thing is an opportunity, but be realistic about the time frame in which to expect such a delivery within Pakistan or its effects for our economy.
Mr. Bhutto Zardari, thank you for taking out the time. Thank you for taking our questions. Thank you again for coming out here in your busy schedule and for engaging with us and the audience here. Appreciate you taking out the time, and look forward to hosting you again in the near future, perhaps in the new year. And with that, this concludes our event. So please thank Minister Bhutto Zardari for his time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for